like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1989, the podcast we talk about the films of 1989, parachuting into a wedding here in 2021. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Nybart.
And I'm Filisko.
And with us today is the great Tom Mison, back again. Looking great, Tom. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to be back.
It's great to have a proper Brit to talk about a proper British film that takes place in Miami and Key West and Cuba.
Blue blood, through and through.
We're doing License to Kill.
We are.
And the last time we did a Bond movie, what was the one we did, Phil?
The World Is
Tomorrow
Not
Never
Enough.
Dies. The World Is
The
Not
World
Enough.
Is Not Enough. Yeah.
I had a much different appreciation of Bond at the time. So I'm a little more I'm a little more down with the world of Bond, and I think I could speak about this a little more learnedly than I did last time.
Well, you're watching them with your son, right? Am I correct that you're working your way through them? Okay.
How old's your son?
My son is 8. One of my sons. I have 3.
Perfect time to start bonding.
So we started with, we were going in. It was great. We're going in order. And we've done the first 3 Connerys, and I told him, well, you got to go a little out of order to watch License to Kill. And he goes, well, which one is that? And I go, it was the one made in like 1989. He goes, no, which number? I'm like, I don't know, like fucking 18?
18 or 19, yeah.
Yeah. So we skipped around a little bit, but
Did he? So he watched this with you?
License to Kill, yes. Yes.
So you sat your 8-year-old son down and watched a man flog a woman, then a man's face explode in a pressure chamber. How's your son? Has he come out of the room since?
He's doing great.
Rollins has seen worse than this, right, Kenny?
Rollins is look, the man flogging the woman was a tough one to explain. So I just pretended like it wasn't happening. I told him to close his eyes in the pressure chamber, which he did.
Okay.
He's watched R-rated movies because, as I've said on this podcast before, I just ran out. I watched every single G through PG-13 movie ever made, and by the time we got to Titanic, it was enough. So
you're also a cool dad, Kenny, is the thing, right? Like cool dads show kids cool movies.
I'm the coolest.
So
yes,
you gotta be a cool dad.
This is a PG-13 movie, believe it or not. License to Kill is actually PG-13, and
it's insane.
And yeah, it's it certainly wasn't the roughest movie he's seen.
So I think I must have been about his age, or maybe a little bit, maybe 9 or 10 when I watched this first time. And that pressure chamber,
yeah,
I forgot that it was this film, but that stuck with me.
That'll fuck you
even
up.
now.
Yeah,
it's with me.
It's a really unsettling.
It's not what you
moment.
expect.
Well, that guy is such a piece of shit.
He is.
And
he is.
I really hated him the whole movie. Like when I watch these movies with my son,
I thought you were
it's
talking about your son again.
Just depends on the day. But I watch it like almost like you're watching a sporting event where that we talk over it about how awful these guys are and what horrible things they're doing.
Sure.
So it really was quite cathartic to see that guy die because he is one of the most disreputable people in Bond history, as far as I could tell.
Can I also say too that I feel like if I got to watch this with Rollins, I might have enjoyed it more too. And this isn't to say that I didn't enjoy this film, but is that's got to be part of the experience for you, right, Kenny? To be able to sort of in watching some of these films, maybe not this film in particular, but seeing your son's enjoyment is going to help you enjoy it too. I mean, I don't know if that's.
I'm primed to like it, perhaps in a way that you weren't, right? My experience will be better if he likes it. So I go into it with the best of
Sure.
highest expectations to like it. I give it every benefit of every doubt. It's certainly, I certainly found the fun in this movie. Like I really did think it was a lot of fun. So
I mean,
do you agree
yes.
that Bond films should be for kids?
Do I agree that
Bond films should be for everyone. It should be for kids to watch and say, "Oh my God, I want to be a spy. That looks so cool." Not, "Oh my God, I want to mope around Scotland and think about my family."
You know what I think, Tom? That's a good question. I think that there should be Bond films for kids, right?
Not exclusively for kids. Not like they shouldn't be,
Yeah, no,
Disney Bond.
I feel like
they should be family adventure Indiana Jones type films, which is why I'm not surprised that you started with the early ones with your son.
And those work really well for him. The Connery ones work really well, and I think the Pierce Brosnan ones will work well. But I know I probably can't show him Casino Royale, for instance. So, or at least for a while. But I want to have space for that interpretation of the character because I love those Daniel Craig ones. While also having those kinds of films, also having the the more fun, like rompy ones. So I think like Spider-Man does it really well right now. Where there are right now, I think all these new Spider-Mans are actually for kids and they're fantastic, including Spider-Verse. But I also think there's a world where you can grow up with that character, and that character could be a little more edgy. I
watched Into the Spider-Verse with my son. I saw it in the cinema.
How old's your son?
Loved it. And my son is 5.5. And he was like, "What's this Into Spider-Verse? What's it Into Spider-Verse? I want to see it. And I thought there's a lot for a kid to get his head around. But he lapped it up.
Yeah,
because it's so much fun. And
how old is he now, your son?
He's 5.5.
Oh, so you saw it in theater with him like 2 years ago?
No. I saw it in the cinema with a friend. And then when I was at home and when it was released at home, I let him watch it. And
that movie's also
covered his eyes for when Kingpin smashes down.
Yeah.
But it's so visually stimulating too, right? Like it's such a gorgeously animated film on top of everything that like even if he's not picking up story points, like it's just
which is what I think why I bring it up about Bond is that levels that adults can enjoy and then levels that kids can enjoy.
Well, and I think that this is an interesting point in terms of where we are in the Bond franchise with License to Kill, which is that people talk about how this film wasn't as successful. It still was successful. It just was
very successful.
But released in a summer where there were so many other very successful films, it dwarfed its performance to a certain degree. They were planning on making a third one with Dalton. He's talked about they were in pre-production. It was called, I think, Property of a Lady, I believe is what the title was for the one that they were about to do.
Not the most that means.
They were going to do it. So it wasn't like they were done with Dalton after this film. He ultimately pulled himself out because it took so long for it to get up and running and what have you. But it feels like a real fulcrum point for the series too, not just because they changed to a different Bond with Brosnan, but like the Brosnan ones have a decidedly different tone than this. You know what I mean? They are going for a much broader audience. I feel like in terms of just, there's a little bit, it's a little more playful. It's a little less dark and violent to a certain degree. And it just feels like it's Cold War stuff. It's Russians. Like it's all that kind, like it feels like they're going back to the well of stuff that people love about Bond.
Bond, I agree with what you're saying, but Bond is cinematic tofu. Whatever is happening in kind of action cinema at that point, Bond then takes and makes a Bond on top of that. So the 90s Brosnan movies feel very Michael Bay, Bruckheimer influenced to me. And then this is, someone said it on your Twitter, but I felt the same way. This is an episode of Miami Vice.
Very.
Moonraker is, we're going to do our Star Trek, Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars, yeah.
So it always seems like Bond is half a step behind putting Bond into whatever's kind of hot in the moment, but the character's so strong and the franchise has so much goodwill. I don't think that's ever really an issue.
Well, it's interesting because at the time, apparently, the whole like cocaine smuggling backdrop that exists in this film, I think it was kind of dogged a little bit. You had Lethal Weapon, you had Beverly Hills Cop 2, you had RoboCop. It was such a sort of tropey thing at that point that I think that this film was maligned for that at the time as well, perhaps unjustly so. But like I'll say this, and just to be completely full disclosure, I've not seen all of the Bond films. I've seen all the Pierce Brosnans. I've seen all the Daniel Craigs. I've seen a couple Connerys. I think I've seen one or two, maybe Roger Moores, and that's kind of it. This was my first Dalton. I have not seen Living Daylights, so I can't speak to the entire franchise as a whole.
I've never seen a Roger Moore Bond.
What?
No. I'll get there. I think in 4 movies.
So I take it that Roger Moore's your favorite Bond, Tom.
Come on. How long have you known me, Phil?
I'm assuming Roger Moore's your favorite Bond.
Roger Moore is my spirit animal.
And my understanding is the Roger Moore Bonds are more of the family-friendly kind of vibe, right? The more playful, fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're campier.
He's pun heavy, camp heavy. Yeah.
Yeah.
He went the longest, right? Like he went to like the brink of being too old, correct?
Yeah, although I think Connery was for his last one because Connery did the first few, then took a break, and then they
never
let
say
George
never.
Lazenby do it, and I think.
But that was explicitly like.
Then he came back and he was really old.
That was explicitly like old man Bond. Never say never again. But Roger Moore did. I looked at it. Roger Moore did 7 in succession.
Yes.
And I couldn't believe how late he did it. Was that?
Thank God for it. Thank God.
Of course, yes. I think from around 70 to 85. So that's that was a big stretch of Bond, and coming off of Connery, that's kind of amazing that people accepted him. But I think that Tom, maybe you can help me with this. The other character in British media. Well, I guess there's 2. One is Sherlock Holmes, but that's hundreds of years old. The other one is Doctor Who, where where British audiences have always accepted a turning over of this character, and particularly not even like the way Bond does it, where every guy has their own unique take on this character. So
now female,
yes. I do think that there was some setting the stage, certainly within England, for this kind of reinvention of the character that Americans always seem to push against. Like Val Kilmer takes over for Michael Keaton, they're like, there is always this thing that we're like, there's only one Batman, But I don't know if that was the case back then. I know that Daniel Craig had his issues when he became Bond, but
it was quite a quaint reason why people had issues with Daniel Craig.
Yes, I remember.
And it's just because he was blonde. And I remember headlines across the tabloids, James Blonde, and this will never work because he's got blonde hair. It's like, what?
You want him over, right?
Idiots. What? That's it? The thing about Bond and with Doctor Who is I think we love to discuss who our favourites are. I think that's why we welcome it, because then we can have lots and lots of chat about what makes a character. And it's why it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really, is that everyone has an idea of what they want Bond to be. Everyone has an idea of what they want the Doctor to be. Yeah. And if it doesn't meet that individual's criteria, then, no, this is stupid. A woman Doctor? Nah.
How has that gone over in England? Because I know people.
What, Jodie's Doctor?
Yes, because people here are very supportive, but people.
Well, I mean, you get the tabloids who are just bastards, and they like to be able to rake shit, especially if it's about a woman. But for the most part, I mean, Jodie's first episode, I think, was the highest watched Doctor Who since Christopher Eccleston's first one.
Who's your favorite, Tom? I'm just because Doctor Who is something that I would very much like to really binge with my son. Even going back to the 60s, as crazy as those.
I have to say Jodie.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Oh,
Are you friends with Jodie?
You'd kill me if I didn't. Yeah.
Oh.
But in reality, I mean,
let's pretend this is 10 years ago.
This is what says a lot about me. My favourite Bond is Roger Moore. I know he's not the best Bond. Sean Connery's the best Bond, but Roger is my favourite. And my favourite Doctor is Sylvester McCoy. He's not the best, but he's my favourite.
Is he the funny
they're very,
one?
very similar. They're both kind of. There are lots of jokes, and you know.
I think Kenny and I had the same moment of who's Sylvester McCoy.
This is the well.
Exactly.
All right, so this is what I know about Doctor Who. Nothing, except I have a book. Tom, you might know this book series. The Who Was or Who Is book series for kids, like these little biographies that they do for kids. So they're not like picture books or chapter books, but they're like 100 pages, and you read it. And I got Rollins, who was Doctor Who. He wanted it. He wanted to know. So we read it together, and it's basically just a rundown of like how many doctors have there been? Like 9 now, 10, 9, right?
Something like that.
Because there've been 13.
Yeah.
And what was the prophecy? There's going to be like 14, and then the world explodes.
12, I think the prophecy was.
Oh, okay.
I mean, can we just say
Well,
the mythology of Doctor Who is so making it up as you go along? It's unbelievable.
That's awesome, though. I wish we had something like that in this country.
I know,
It's embarrassing we don't.
I watched.
But then you're right to bring up Batman. You're right to bring up
Yes.
Batman, and it's the same thing. Everyone has their favorite Batman, and it's either the Batman that you watched when you were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it usually always is. Sylvester McCoy was the Doctor when I was young, and Roger Moore was the first Bond that I ever saw. So maybe there's nostalgia.
It does feel also like, and perhaps this says more about America than anything, but now it's who's your favorite Joker as well. Like now there's like so many Jokers in the mix.
I don't have a favorite.
Anyone who refuses to shave their moustache, so it has to be waxed over.
Yeah, so Cesar Romero is your favorite. My favorite Joker is Jared Leto, of course. But
of course, because he's damaged. That's right.
Yeah. Me. I always loved Leto's Joker, Clooney's Batman, and I'm a big Lazenby guy. So that's where I go.
Hear that Lazenby. I've not seen the Lazenby movie, but people really love the Lazenby movie. It's it's the one where Bond gets married, which is why everyone's just like,
on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah,
There's a really interesting bit.
You know what happens at the end of that, though, right?
She dies, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's like married for a minute.
Yeah.
Tracy Bond. But the opening, when there's I know, Tracy. Of all the people Bond goes for, he ends up with Tracy.
Tabloids
at the very beginning, he's trying to seduce a girl, and then some baddies come along and he has to do a big fight, and the girl pisses off in a car and runs away. And he picks up her shoes. He's on a beach and looks after her, and then says, "This never happened to the other fella," and looks into the
that's
camera.
good.
Oh, wow.
So Bond
Right
breaks
to
the
camera?
fourth wall. Right
That's
to camera.
amazing.
Never happened to the other guy.
That's so weird. That's so weird.
Isn't it?
So British.
He was Australian.
So I want to just... I'm very sort of split on this movie. So I'm excited to talk about it, not because for a bunch of reasons, but because I don't really know where I land on it. I feel like it doesn't feel very British to me because of its landscape and because of its subject matter, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not dogging that. I'm just saying that that's an interesting thing about it.
Phil, before we dive into License to Kill, I want to hear a little bit more from Tom about your experience with Bond growing up, what it meant to you as a kid, as an actor, as a film fan, your friends. Like I don't think I have a great understanding of just how important Bond is to a child growing up in England.
Bond has always been, when you're a kid, you watch Bond and you think, I want to be a spy. That's what I want. I want to be that. And I like that. One of the reasons I like the Roger Moore Bonds and the Connery ones is there's something really tongue-in-cheek about them, which is so British. It's such a British tongue-in-cheek. I don't think an American production of Bond would have Bond ski off a mountain and then the parachute is a Union Jack. And as I said, there's always discussions. Who will the next Bond be? Who should the next Bond be? Who's your favourite Bond? What do you like about Bond? And Bond's always been there. Every Christmas, it's the stuff that's on every weekend running up to Christmas. And there are Bond marathons on telly. So he's kind of always there. It never inspired me to be an actor. Although Roger Moore is,
but that's cool.
There's a place in London. It's called Spotlight, and it's like audition rooms. So you go there and you queue up, and it's full of fucking actors, and you wait to go into little rooms and do terrible auditions for jobs you won't ever get. And when you go up the stairs, they've painted on the wall lots of little drawings of different actors. With a quote from each of them. So there's Maggie Smith, and there's Laurence Olivier and Cumberbatch. And then there's a drawing of Roger Moore. And the quote is, "My acting range, left eyebrow raised or right eyebrow raised."
For him.
Can I ask what your
that's great.
first...
That's an entire career.
What was your first Bond movie? The first one you saw? Was it License to Kill?
I can't remember.
Okay.
I really can't remember.
I know what mine was.
Go on.
Mine was GoldenEye. I saw it in the theater. It was the first Bond movie I ever saw. So I was 13 before I ever saw a Bond movie.
Really? That was the first one I saw in the cinema, and I've seen every Bond in the cinema since. Even the really terrible.
There two. I want to ask another question about that. But when you're talking about Bond being on television every Christmas and marathons and that kind of thing, the closest comparison I could think to America is not a character, but an actor. It reminds me a little bit of John Wayne, of the way John Wayne movies for a certain generation of people fit that bill, play it over and over again, and have encyclopedic knowledge of what he did. And kind of this, it's not highbrow stuff. It's certainly not lowbrow stuff, but it's this populist fare that was very Americana in its own way.
An interesting difference between the two is, although John Wayne, obviously, old cowboys, he's a blue-collar hero, whereas Bond is completely alien to 90% of the population.
Is that so?
He's a private schoolboy, then went to Cambridge, joined the army. He's incredibly wealthy. He's posh, he's white, he goes around the world to places doing things that none of us can ever dream of doing. And so I wouldn't even say it's an aspirational thing. It's just he's alien. He's something other to most of us.
Superhero.
Whereas exactly, superhero, which I think is also why the fun knockabout kids romp Bond is so great, because it plays into the superhero thing rather than I think that wounded Superman.
We talked. Obviously, we're talking about the casting changes, but it should also be said the tonal changes as well. Like what each actor brings to it, obviously has a different vibe, right? Which is why everyone's like, "This is my favorite Bond. This is my favorite Bond." But that flexibility of character is also. And we talked about this a little bit. I think, Kenny, when we did "The World Is Not Enough," of just how perennial and flexible the character of James Bond is. Perhaps more so than any other character I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of
it was so disappointing, the later Pierce Brosnan films.
Sure. Yes.
Because I think he's perfect for Bond.
Yeah.
He can nail the corny jokes and make them seem not corny. He can really do the action stuff well. You can completely buy him in the character, but he wasn't really served very well by Invisible Cars and John Cleese.
Yeah, I love GoldenEye. I think GoldenEye is one of my favorite Bond films, and it's probably because of the age I was at and where it hit me and all that sort of stuff. Tomorrow Never Dies is not very good. I think that why am I drawing a blank on the villain, the actor who plays the villain, in that, Jonathan Pryce, who's some like sort of
Rupert Murdoch
character.
Guy.
Yeah. And then we talked about World Is Not Enough, which I actually quite like, even if it's kind of a weird movie. And then Die Another Day is just a disaster. And it's why they felt they had no choice but to kind of reboot the whole franchise at that point.
But you know what's funny? Okay, so When I say I saw my first Bond film, GoldenEye was 95, so I was 13 years old. Um, License to Kill was 89. That was, 6 years prior. I was 7 years old. This is the longest hiatus between a theatrical Bond film, 89 to 95, right in the sweet spot for us, Phil, right when we would have been going to see these movies in the theaters. So it's an interesting thing for us in particular that Bond wasn't a feature of our childhood. If God came to Bond, it came to us a little later, or it was inculcated upon us by our parents when we were younger, based on these older movies. And even though my dad loves Bond, I didn't even know that. He never made a point of showing me the Connery Bonds or the Roger Moore Bonds. So I wonder what that was like, that moment, because Bond never waits that long to get rebooted, right? I think GoldenEye was a couple years after Die Another Day, 3 years after.
Casino Royale was a few years after Die Another Day. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. What was that like, those 6 years in England without a Bond film? How did that feel?
From 1989,
89 to 95, like figuring out. Because here's what, just a little more context. I thought that Bond was a franchise in 95 was a franchise from forever ago. Right? Was a franchise from forever. It was not a living, breathing thing. It was a rebooted thing brought back from the dead. In the context of now, 6 years is nothing. But I bet those 6 years felt like, I don't know. I'm interested. Or
probably. I mean, how old was I in 1989? 7. So from after this film, I mean, I wasn't really aware of. I didn't go to the cinema and watch them. I didn't really see.
Did you feel an absence? Did you feel an absence as a kid for the new Bond?
Yes, because like you said, it seemed like something from a parent's generation, which I guess it was. But it felt really like a cool discovery when you saw a Bond film, and then for the first time, there's no one like Sean Connery or Roger Moore around. Thank God there's no like Roger Moore.
Well,
I mean, I do think it's interesting what you're talking about, Kenny, in terms of this sort of this vacuum, right? And what sort of tried to fill that over the course of those years. I mean, we do get Mission Impossible, but that doesn't come until 96. So it is actually after GoldenEye. So
when's Austin Powers, the first Austin Powers?
That's 97.
Because the second one is 99. We did it.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember. I listened to it.
Yeah, that's one there, right there.
but I just think it's,
the first one was 97.
Yeah, it is interesting that, first and foremost, just for context perspective, I guess there was issues with MGM in terms of rights and in terms of all that sort of shit. That's what the holdup was behind. The film was called Property of a Lady, which was to start shooting in 90, and then Dalton retires in 94, and then 95 they do GoldenEye. So it's essentially 5 years of like legal issues and bullshit back and forth between them, and that's what leads to this sort of issues. But it works out obviously great for Pierce Brosnan, and ultimately for the series. I don't know what apparently this film was going to be about, some sort of it was going to be about technology or some sort of bullshit in terms of like, I don't know what it was, but I feel like I have it here, but whatever, I'll find it and we'll talk about it. But I think that it's interesting. I want to talk about the Dalton of it all for a second. He only does 2 of these movies. He kind of gets screwed a little bit in the sense that Living Daylights, which I've never seen, but past and future guest Eric Carrasco, who came on for World Is Not Enough, I was texting with him. He really likes Living Daylights. He feels like that's a much more classically Bond film. You know, it's Cold War, it's all that sort of shit. They do this film because apparently, something about production in London. There was some issue with shooting in London. Eon Productions had rising costs, and there was some sort of guild shit, and I don't know, but they couldn't shoot in London, which is why this film takes place entirely outside of London for the first time for a Bond film.
And in China. They were going to shoot it in China.
They were
it
going to shoot it in
China. It wasn't
China.
going to be
Correct.
a South American drug thing at all.
Yes, they had a whole chase sequence along the Great Wall that they had planned.
Amazing.
Which would have been cool. It was originally called License Revoked, a less effective title. But yeah, I mean, it's they talk about, they compared the script to Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. The writer had the audacity to compare it to that.
Very similar.
And yeah, it's interesting. These Bond films, and I'm sure you know this, Tom, but like there's so much rumor and conjecture around them as to like what's this one about and where does it take place and who's the Bond girl and who's the villain. Like we still do that today, which shows that like people's love for this franchise has not gone anywhere.
No, you're right, Phil.
So I agree. I also want to say that Dalton claims that Bond doesn't have as much sex in this movie because of AIDS at the time. He said that in an interview, claiming, but I don't think this guy doesn't have sex in this movie. He has sex with 2 different women multiple times. He did.
Yeah. That's so something Timothy Dalton would say.
It's so Dalton. Yeah.
But let's talk about Dalton.
I met Timothy Dalton once.
Was he nice?
Was he lovely?
Well, I say met. I bumped into him. It was only a couple of years ago. I was at the theatre.
Yeah.
It might have been the last play I saw before the fucking virus thing. And I walked around a corner, and he was watching the play as well. Walked around the corner and like bumped into this guy who I'm 6'1", and he towered over me. He was just big, and I went, "Oh God, I'm sorry," and realised it was Dalton. And he looked down at me, and he said, "There's no need to apologise." And he was the most beautiful man I have ever seen in my life. And the fact that he only had sex with 2 women in this film is unbelievable, because I would have, he could have kissed me right then, and I would not have fought. And I went back to my seat and I said to my wife, I've just bumped into Timothy Dalton, and all I want is to bump into Timothy Dalton again.
That's tremendous.
So beautiful.
That's
great. I think it's criminal that he was given this hairdo in License to Kill.
What are they doing with his hair in this movie?
It is criminal. I couldn't agree with you more. It's one of the worst haircuts in the history of film. And everything else about it is everything about the movie is in a style that like I have such deep affinity for. Like this late 80s Miami Deco thing I am crazy about. The hair destroys this film. I'm interested in so much, Tom. Such a curious guy, but I'm interested in Dalton in general, right? Who is Timothy Dalton? What was he before Bond? And do all men and women want to faint when they see him in public? Is he?
Oh, probably. Now,
is he better looking now than he was then, in your opinion?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's aged really well.
Penny Dreadful. Watch him in Penny Dreadful.
Yeah, he's great in Penny Dreadful.
Amazing. And he's a brilliant. He shows that he's a brilliant actor as well.
He's a real classically trained actor. You wouldn't know it from watching this film, but he's
exactly. I think before Bond, he certainly wasn't a huge star. He was doing. He did rep theatre up in Glasgow with my wife's stepdad. Back when my wife's stepdad was an actor, and they were in a season of plays together. And I think it was during that he was offered Bond and left early, which Charlotte's stepdad was delighted with because he was understudying him, so he actually
before Bond,
he wasn't like a household name.
Yeah, I mean, before Bond, I'm just looking at his filmography here. I mean, he's in The Lion of Winter. He's in Wuthering Heights in 1970. Mary Queen of Scots in 71.
Was he Heathcliff?
He was Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights.
This is just a very young man. we're talking
Yes,
about.
this is 1970, so he doesn't do Living Daylights till 87. So it's
So that's interesting to me too, because Connery had never really done much. I mean, he'd done a little bit before he was Bond. Roger Moore, not that much before he was Bond. Timothy Dalton, not that much before he was Bond. This was all pre. I don't know about Lazenby. It was all pre-Bond speculation to some extent because Pierce Brosnan was a name by the time he did Bond. Pierce Brosnan had done Remington Steele, and Pierce Brosnan wasn't Daniel Craig, who was a bona fide movie star at that point. But it is interesting that I think Timothy Dalton is kind of the last anonymous Bond.
Right. That feels right to me. Yeah. I mean, I think that I can't speak to Roger Moore prior to Bond because he did start doing Bond relatively late. So I just don't know his career prior to that. But to your point, it certainly didn't travel overseas.
I read that Dalton was offered it earlier. Mm-hmm. I think he was offered it when Roger Moore was offered it, maybe. But he thought he was
possibly
too young. No, George Lazenby. It was George
Lazenby makes more sense. Yeah.
And he thought he was too young because he was early.
He's always been on the radar.
20s.
Yeah.
And George.
Well, Brosnan was offered it before he couldn't get out of his Remington Steele contract. So if I'm not mistaken, he was offered it perhaps prior to Living Daylights, like before.
I'm guessing Brosnan was offered it at birth. I'm guessing he came out. And they're like, we have to sign you to a future Bond deal because you're the only. No one will ever look more like James Bond.
Out of the womb and a parachute
with the head of hair.
Jack as he fell down.
But yeah. So
it really is. Sorry, go ahead.
The other thing about Timothy Dalton that I want to bring up is my son loved this movie, License to Kill. Did not love Timothy Dalton. Like
interesting.
Like he was like, I love it.
He's a grown-up Bond. He is a grown-up Bond.
He said he was
and
nothing.
He was definitely before his time.
Yeah.
He really liked Connery's portrayal a lot. There's something about Connery that just kind of feels very comfortable to him. And yeah, and I'll tell you, I felt the same way. I actually think this movie is great. I love an 80s action movie. I love an 80s action premise. I don't care that it's biting off of the other 80s action movie at the time because I haven't just sat through Lethal Weapon and all these movies in the preceding years. This is like where I live to some extent, and I also like I think the plot's wonderful. I'm very into the SWAT of it, an escaped convict paying people to let him go, and the simple revenge thriller. But I did think Timothy Dalton was a bit of a charisma suck. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I don't know.
I wonder whether that's because of, the script. It's Bond. He's
the material.
Miserable. His best mate's just had his leg bitten off, and
his wife's been raped and murdered.
Oh yeah, and, so good. His wife and Bond definitely shagged.
Yeah. 100%. At the wedding, the kissing between them?
A lot of kissing going on. I don't think Felix even cared. I don't think Felix gave a shit.
I don't think he cared either. Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. I agree with what you're saying, Kenny, about him being a bit of a charisma. But I think that's
why, because it's low, it's a bummed out Bond. And I would love to have seen Dalton with more of a flary script. Because it seems as though the other characters were given the one-liners.
Yes. But it's more of Q was great. It's more of a and that man was the same age, I think, for like 30 years. But it's more of a Daniel Craig storyline. It's something that Daniel Craig plays really well. It's like because he wouldn't played it so much as a dour Bond. It's a focused Bond, right? It's a man on a very specific mission to avenge the death of his best friend, or the shark bite of his best friend. And I do feel what you felt, Tom, which is it did feel like he was just kind of a little sad throughout the movie.
Yeah, part of it also feels a little bit like I'm not sure that James Bond, or certainly this version of James Bond, fits in this universe, like in this script. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know that James Bond and Miami Vice necessarily are a good fit. Now, it's possible that a different Bond might have been able to imbue it with a little bit more charisma. I don't know, but
I'm going to say something that I know Kenny will not like.
Yeah, I don't care.
They could have cut almost all of the Florida stuff. I think it feels to me like two separate films. There's the
Which is the Florida beginning stuff?
The beginning stuff.
Oh, that's the stuff I like.
Which is seriously lacking in fish puns. And then as soon as he heads, I mean, come on, License to Krill. I wrote down. And then when he heads south, it's a completely different film. And suddenly you've got the televangelist, and you've got bad guys, and you've got Chinese fight sequences.
I don't disagree with you.
Completely different. And
I don't disagree either.
I think they're good.
It starts on a downer. The whole of that first hour is a bit of an energy drag, and then finally it becomes a Bond film.
I loved the opening the opening sequence, so I would certainly keep that. I liked I liked the thing with the plane
that Chris Nolan stole for Dark Knight Rises.
Yes, and I liked the parachuting in, and I think it's like that. To me, that's the height of charm. Parachuting into a wedding and just going about the wedding as nothing happened. Love.
Getting off with the bride.
Can I also just say? Can I say when they parachute into the wedding, I thought to myself it would actually maybe be fun to parachute into a wedding. Like, Kenny, did you think if you parachuted into your own wedding? No, you wouldn't want to do that?
She would have married me either way.
It's such a you're never going to do anything that ridiculous or insane again. Like, you're setting up the marriage to fail is what I think. But anyway.
I everything about that beginning was to me, because that's when I texted you, Phil, that I loved it. That is that wild, aggressive, insane Bond. They left for half an hour to go arrest a drug dealer and got back in time to make the wedding. That's awesome. And then I agree with you, Tom. I think pretty quickly after, you could have, done the leg stuff and done all the great shark stuff with Benicio, who is incredible, and
He's
talk
amazing.
about a gorgeous man.
Yeah.
And then you could have gone down to Cuba, and we could have had a lot of fun.
I will say though that if we made the cuts that you're suggesting, Tom, we'd lose perhaps one of my favorite moments in the entire film, which is when Bond goes to the Pan Am counter to buy a ticket, and the girl behind the counter goes, "Some big drug dealer just escaped." And he just peels off.
So good.
It's fucking great. It's just, oh my god. I mean,
that is how you make movies. That right there. That should be taught in schools, because I'll never forget it. It's a great moment.
Never forget it.
And the information got out that needed to get out, and we could just move on to more fights and more fucking.
Somewhere I wrote down, it was when Sanchez was being interrogated by
over the shark
guy
tank.
who ends up being...
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
When he's been arrested.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Before he escapes. Yeah.
And he's offering the $2 million and all the rest of it. And it's a scene that is entirely exposition. Fine. But I wrote down, I don't know why exposition doesn't work with a Southern accent.
I mean, can I just say that as someone that has forced Tom to say hours of expositional dialogue, it sounds better with a British accent. Let me tell you.
That's it. That's an old American trick. Have the Brit do it.
I mean,
that's why Jeremy Irons was cast. I've seen the original Watchmen. Adrian V is not British.
So let me just very briefly read the synopsis for our listeners who might not have seen this film. James Bond, this is James Bond adventure in which 007 relinquishes his license to kill, disobeys his orders, and goes on a mission of revenge when his best friend's wife is killed by a drug baron. A beautiful CIA pilot flies him to Sanchez's South American headquarters, where, disguised as a hitman, Bond is hired by a villainous drug dealer. written by Michael G. Wilson and Richard Maubaum, directed by John Glenn. This is his 5th Bond film in a row. It would end up being his last. License to Kill opened on July 14th, 1989 in 4th place behind Lethal Weapon 2, Batman, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It would go on to make $156 million worldwide on a $32 million budget. It has 78% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 61% from audiences. Roger Ebert gave the film 3.5 out of 4 stars, said License to Kill ends, as all the Bond films do, with an extended chase and stunt sequence. This one involves some truly amazing stunt work and 3 giant gasoline trucks. I lost count. There's more than 3 in that scene. I Karen fucking to you. But anyway, there were moments when I was straining to spot the trickery as a big semi-rig spun along, tilted to one side to miss a missile aimed at the bad guys. But the stunt all looks convincing, and the effect on the closing sequence is exhilarating. On the basis of the second performance as Bond, Dalton can have the role as long as he wants it. He makes an effective Bond, lacking Sean Connery's grace and humor and Roger Moore's suave self-mockery, but with a lean tension and toughness that is possibly more contemporary. The major difference between Dalton and the early Bonds is that he seems to prefer action to sex, but then so does the movie business. These days, License to Kill is one of the best of the recent Bonds.
That's such an Ebert line, because the biggest lament of Ebert's career is less action, more sex. All he wants is for naked women jumping around on trampolines. That's what he thinks.
Correct.
And to his credit, he's very open about it. He wrote one movie. I think it was naked women jumping on trampolines for 45 minutes.
Correct.
And taking drugs.
Yeah. That's his bit. I mean, it's why he loved American Beauty as much as he did.
Well, he's such a creep.
Yeah.
God rest his soul.
I do think, though, that this film is pretty grimy. Like, it's kind of a gross movie at times. Like, I think about that bar that they go to. Do you know what I'm talking about? When that was the giant bar fight with the man wielding a giant swordfish.
Love it. 1980s bar fight. I wrote down the swordfish. I wrote down in my notes, and in capital letters, I wrote, "This is fucking Bond." Because that's what I want. A man with a swordfish.
Giant swordfish.
And the Marlin. It was awesome. That was great. I remember I screamed.
Marlin.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm like, he's going to get him with a Marlin. Like, that's fun shit. that reminds me a little bit of Dr. No. That's like, that feels like Bond to me. There's always some grimy bar where some shit goes down, and there's like some place that James Bond never should be. You know? Well, I guess he should be. That he does hang out there. This movie it's actually a fantastic.
This raises another point. Pam, the least Bond girl name. Pam Bouvier.
I know, and then she goes by Kennedy. That's I got it.
Pam Bouvier definitely is at home there. Mm-hmm. And they make a point of showing that Bond is out of his, he comes with his little pistol and she's got a shotgun, and she saves him from the bar fight. And it's the start of the point that in this film, they're trying to be more progressive with how they portray the women.
Yes.
Pam Bouvier can hold her own. She's a CIA operative. She's Bond's equal.
She can fly a plane. She can fire a gun.
Bond needs her in order to chase the bad guy. And what was the other girl's name? Lupe.
Okay.
Lupe is someone. She says she struggled for 15 years to get out of her home country, and that was a line of dialogue that she says towards the end. And Sanchez is textbook gaslighting her in an abusive relationship, but she's trying to work her way out. And there are elements to these women that are more progressive, but then it just disappears.
At the end, it's any attempt is just blown out of the water.
They completely fall in love with Bond. They're completely, helpless damsels in distress, and they both want to snog him at the end.
I do think that, but to your point, it does feel like they're given like definition and like character, right? Like there is dimension to a certain degree to these characters that we have not really seen in the female Bond characters before this. But then they, to your point, throw it all away in the third act, and they both want to fuck him. So,
which is why it's, like I say, it's two different films split down the middle.
I also have no idea what's happening in this movie for most of it. Like
I'm with
again,
you. I'm with you.
It's a real shut your brain off movie, which is why I was able to enjoy it. But I don't understand why Sanchez took Bond in. I never got. Was I missing connective tissue? What happened there?
Bond goes to the casino and pretends to lose to get Sanchez's attention, then starts winning. Sanchez invites him in, and to find out who Bond is, and Bond reveals that he's basically a gun for hire. That he used to be with the British Secret Service, and now he's a protector. And Sanchez, for some reason, despite his thousands of goons, and he talks about loyalty all the time, and they're clearly loyal to him, thinks, oh yeah, I'll have this guy as well. It doesn't make a great deal of sense.
I'll put him in my finest room. And on top of that, some of these goons had already had fights with James Bond. Benicio had seen him before earlier in the movie. So his plan was
yes, but
absurd.
I don't think Benicio sees him until they're in the lab. Doesn't see, because he's not in
under the mask.
You're totally right. You're totally
Which
right.
Is why he then has
right. Yes. You're totally right that's the first time Benicio sees him, but Bond didn't know that was going to be the first time he saw him. So that was I'm saying what a bad plan that, like, this guy who's his right hand. You're lucky that he went. I think he might have gone to Haiti for the weekend because he got to hang out. Otherwise, he might have gotten got a little earlier.
Can I say where the film makes my head hurt? It's the Wayne Newton cult component that they need as a front.
I had to look that up. That actually was brilliant.
Where I was like, wow. And then they're putting the drugs in the gasoline and the petrol, and then removing it later once they. It's a very convoluted
I had to
plan.
watch this film again to understand it. I watched it earlier this week, and then I had to watch it a second time to even come close to understanding. There are so many different types of henchmen doing so many different things. There's the money man, the little money guy.
Mm-hmm.
No point. Cut him. He stays in Florida. Put him in Florida. Cut the whole thing.
Get him. Get rid of him. Totally.
Yeah. Then you also the televangelist, the professor. What's his jobs?
No, Joe Butcher. Joe Butcher.
That's a completely different film.
That's
he's
cool.
in his own lair.
Good film.
And then don't forget about the Hong Kong.
That's a Roger Moore Bond film. There.
The Hong Kong Narcotics Bureau that comes involved, and those guys shooting up that, like, it just has a lot of moving pieces.
That was fun too. That was fun. That was very Bondy. That was very Bondy to me.
And then suddenly there's another British guy. After two viewings, I don't know who the British guy was who was with the Hong Kong contingent.
That one I can't help.
Tries to inject Bond and take him back to.
That one I don't know.
Also, did you notice in that fight with the two Chinese guys and Bond?
Yeah.
Did you notice the sound in that?
No.
It absolutely sounds like afterwards they went. They added on someone with their mouth doing kung fu noises.
Oh my God.
Look up that scene. It must be on YouTube on its own.
That's incredible.
Oh, and also in the tanker scene, chase at the end, which I loved. I had to rewind it to watch it again. And then I watched it a third time because I love it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Bond flies in on the plane, jumps on a tanker. Sanchez is in a car. Bond goes down by the wheels, and Sanchez with an Uzi shoots out. Now you listen there, because this is so brilliant. And I wrote down again, this is fucking Bond in capitals. He fires, and you get the sounds of all the ricochets off the truck. The ricochets play the Bond theme.
Oh, that's
they go
awesome.
pew 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 pew. 100%. I swear to you. I remind you. Listen
That's
to
If
it
you
again.
don't think
fantastic.
it's a good movie, then you don't actually like cinema. It's very obvious.
That's a. I mean,
You just nailed it.
This movie also, you know, at the beginning or in the sort of the first third, we have all this like shark stuff. We have all this aquarium stuff, which also feels very Bond to me. Lowering people into tanks, putting people
Electric
inside
eels.
tanks, hooking
also
someone's belt and pulling them into a tank that has an electric eel in it is just incredible.
That was good. Also, there's the thing with the conveyor belt into the cocaine masher. The cocaine saw. I'm not sure what that was, but very dangerous. A lot of fun.
How many conveyor belts have there been in Bond films? I mean, it's just it's
Not
fantastic.
enough. Not enough.
It's great.
can never have
But I
enough
love this movie. Does sort of you have this moment where Leiter or Felix is being lowered into the tank, right? And and he's like, "Where's my wife?" And Benicio says, "Don't worry, we gave her a nice honeymoon," which is
honeymoon.
He really milks that honeymoon line.
And I love that because we all know Benicio and his shtick now, and I love it. I'm a big fan of his.
Sure,
it's so nice to see that that's not put on. That was him even when he was 21. That's just naturally Del Toro, and thank God for it. I love him.
Yep. I also love
dark.
Felix being lowered into the tank and screaming, "I'll see you in hell" is just like that is Bond to me. Like that type of stuff of just like just playing for the cheap seats. It's just
surviving this one. I don't know how he survived it. I like that they basically wrapped him in newspaper, and they're like Seattle Fish Market threw him onto the bed, but he turned out to be still alive.
How do we feel about the note that's left on him?
I love the note more than
so good.
He disagreed with something that ate him. So stupid.
Are you telling me that if either of you were sitting at your little laptops, writing out your tapping out your script, all this, and you came up with suddenly he disagreed with something that ate him, you would not sit back in your chair and say, "That was a good day's work."
I would. Yeah, it's great. But I would also probably feel the same way after Sharky sees him in the hospital and says, "Chainsaw my ass. I know a shark bite when I see one." So, I
love the idea that changes it somehow, as if they went after with a chainsaw. Like, all right, big deal. Cuban drug smugglers go after people with chainsaws every day. What else is new? No, this is a shark.
This is a shark, man.
And of course, Sharky knows a shark bite when he sees him. His
name's Sharky.
Now I'm wondering, because obviously all this stuff is on purpose. I am wondering why they didn't just amp up the camp just a little more.
I agree.
Because if you did amp up the camp just a little more, because you're so close, this feels like it would have been a classic Bond.
I agree.
No,
I completely agree.
If it was just a little, a little more playful, a little lighter, a little campier, it would have really.
It definitely seems like they're going down the darker route despite themselves.
Yeah,
they can't get away from it. They can't get away from what makes Bond Bond.
Yeah,
and those Bond bits, like Kenny, you'd said the opening. He says, "Let's go fishing" before jumping down to hook a plane.
So good.
It's so good. I mean, speaking of the planes, there's a whole seaplane sequence that, I mean, I will never get tired of Bond throwing henchmen out of planes and just hearing them scream as they're flailing out of planes. Like when he opens the emergency door,
was awesome,
and the guy just goes out with the door. It's great. It's good stuff.
Starting with him throwing the guy overboard, stealing his oxygen tank, underwater fight. My son was like, "Wait, do you fight slower underwater?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude. Have you ever swam?" So embarrassing. Such an embarrassing moment for me as a father. The underwater fight scene was great.
The underwater. Well, I mean, that's like Thunderball that's sort of like that's the watermark, no pun intended, for the underwater sequences. But like, I don't know. There's something great about. It's just so stupid. Just people with fucking harpoons and scuba. It's great. It's great.
My favorite Bond film is The Spy Who Loved Me, and that's entirely underwater. The baddie has an underwater lair. His whole plan is to flood the entire world so that we all have to live underwater.
Oh, stop!
That's
a
great fucking plan.
Movies. I'm so excited. I got to power through these last two Connerys, and then I can get. What are the last two Connerys? I think Thunderball is one of them, and then
I think it's. I mean, you never say never, but that comes.
Well, I'm not counting that. Yeah. I'm in chronological order. The next one is.
I don't know which one it is.
We'll power through them.
Bond and water, they go together very well. But they tell your son, that people do fight underwater slowly. This was another interesting. This is going back to. Kenny's had enough.
Kenny's just like, I'm out. Yeah, no, he's obviously he's got to go to the bathroom or something.
No, I just have to. You know me. I just got to let my dog in every once in a while. He's scratching at the door.
Oh, fair enough. Money.
Yes.
Bond throwing the however much
suitcase,
it is,
$2 million at the guy.
So Sharkin can do is what a terrible waste of money. Another example of Bond being hyper privileged.
Oh yeah,
that he can just chuck money around when he's in the plane and he bashes one baddie out of the plane and lets tens of thousands of dollars fly out the window. Sharky why don't you just kill the bad guy? Give Sharky the money. I think Sharky would probably quite like the money. Or you know what? Give it to charity. Give it to a Florida orphanage or something. But no, he doesn't think about it. And this is this is Bond being distant in a bad way for me. I felt that was really icky.
Well, this brings a question that I'm curious what you guys think of, because what does Bond care about? Like what fuels him as a character? I know that it changes sort of from movie to movie in terms of like an impetus, but like he's sort of an enigma in that regard, right? Like he's a catch-all for whatever we kind of want him to be. But it comes back to sort of what you're saying of like he's throwing away money. I guess it's good versus evil. He just wants to stop bad guys.
And I think it's the very old-fashioned Queen and Country.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
For the time, for when Bond was written, when Fleming was writing it, it was a really patriotic time.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I've been here and locked down, I've been reading the John le Carré, George Smiley novels in order, because that's the kind of arsehole I am. And they're amazing.
I was going to go with nerd.
And le Carré wrote them as an antidote to Bond, because he was a real spy, and he saw Fleming was writing in the 50s, and the first Smiley book was 61. He saw Fleming's portrayal of the spy trade and decided he'd show it real in all of its boring bureaucracy. But the one thing that unites them is spies do it for love of England. And you can see it in a lot of the one line. What was it? It's the very last line of The Spy Who Loved Me, when Bond is in a submarine and he is picked up by a British battleship, and all of his superiors are there, and they look through the window, and Bond is in the embraces of the Bond girl in this little sub. You say, Bond, good grief! Oh, what are you doing, Bond? And Roger turns and says, just keeping the British end up.
I gotta watch these. These are exciting.
Masterful. But you've got that line. You've got the Union Jack. You've got it's a very, very old-fashioned, which luckily doesn't really exist anymore. Queen and Country, and doing it for
that makes sense.
And I think that's what drives.
We have that too, right? We have that too. All all of our spycraft movies, but also all of our military movies play on the same idea. Uncle Sam, do it for the Stars and Stripes. That same kind of bullshit runs through us. And like that's why one of my favorite things was in Toy Story 4, Duke Kaboom was playing on that with the Canadians because the Canadians don't do that shit.
We don't do that.
You know, the idea of a Canadian guy rolling down in a maple leaf is so fucking funny. It really shines a light on how absurd and embarrassing our two cultures are, Tom. Our jingoism. It's humiliating.
Although why Trudeau has never come out and said, yes, we Canada is
it was so brilliant. So I do want to. All right, so I want to make.
But
a
I
point.
think that's what he believes in. To answer your question,
yeah, no, and I think that's completely that makes complete sense.
Queen and country.
Yeah.
So I want to bring up something about myself. What a surprise! When we did the first Bond film that we did, can't remember what it is again. It's Not Tomorrow Never Dies.
World is not enough. World is not enough.
Not enough. I had seen less or fewer Bond films, and I was far more critical of Bond, the character, and Bond fandom. Because if you are not willing to jump in and submerge yourself in this world, it is very problematic. I mean, beyond the privilege stuff you're talking about, you know, there's the misogyny and the violence is jarring, and it's also not really something that, you know, you should be preaching to impressionable young boys who these films seem to be for. It does take a little bit.
No, I agree, and you can definitely see with the Daniel Craig Bonds that they've tried to steer away from them. I do think it's possible to do the old-fashioned Bond and have it less problematic.
Without question, because people do make films like that now, all the time.
But also, that's why it was so easy. It was low-hanging fruit for Austin Powers.
Yeah,
it was so easy. Even then, in the 90s, when things weren't exactly.
But Austin's also making fun of like British culture, kind of far and wide, like not just specifically the spy thing.
But I do want to kind of amend my position on it because now that I feel like I've seen, you know, now I've seen about maybe half of the Bond films, maybe more. It's really not to be taken seriously the way I was taking it seriously, and I do think, and I think that's a thing that
100%, yeah.
I think that's a thing not just with Bond, but with all fandoms. People on the outside of the culture tend to take it a lot more seriously than people on the inside. That's true with, I think that's true with a lot of things, basically, you guys know. And now I don't know. I guess I would have told myself 2 years ago when we did that movie, watch a few more Bond films and chill the fuck out. And what do you guys think of that?
Everyone should.
I will say this though.
Yeah.
It should be said though that it does feel like the Daniel Craig films, which felt like they're the Chris Nolan-y Batman version of Bond to some degree or another, they took themselves a little more seriously. I mean, they certainly feel like they're movies made with a little bit more. I mean, Sam Mendes is not a light filmmaker. I mean, for all intents and purposes. So I do believe that he brought perhaps too much. Some people might argue. I don't know. I really like Skyfall. I really like Casino Royale. I think the other two are spotty. But I think
I really like those two as well. But I wonder if those films are made for people who don't love Bond like me.
That might be true.
Yes, probably. Well, I saw all of them in cinema. I remember enjoying all of them as action films more than as Bond films.
Yeah.
Daniel Craig is a ferociously talented actor. I think he's terrific. I remembered one of them, full cinema, and there's a scene where Bond meets Q, played by Ben Whishaw, brilliantly. What a brilliant way to follow Desmond Llewellyn, is go complete opposite, and I think he's great. And they meet in, I think it's the National Gallery or somewhere.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he hands him a briefcase, and in it is a little gun.
Yep.
And Q says, what did you expect? Gadgets. We don't really go in for that sort of thing anymore.
Yeah.
The entire cinema went, oh, what? We're not going to get any gadgets. Oh, there was a slight deflation from a full cinema.
Yeah.
And then later in the film, or it may have been another film, he opens the garage door and whips off a tarpaulin, and there's the old Aston Martin, and John Barry's down, and starts up. It was the closest I've been in a British cinema, the equivalent to Captain America catching Mjolnir.
Thor's hammer. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Everyone went, yes, there's Bond, there's Bond.
Yeah.
And we all enjoyed, I could tell that we were all enjoying the film. But as soon as you get little hints of what we expect from Bond, it's just magic.
Well, that's what feels like the Daniel Craig movies weaponize really perfectly, giving you just enough of that stuff so it still feels like a Bond film, and yet at the same time, perhaps a little more quote unquote substantive, I guess, is sort of what they're trying to do.
I think you nailed it, Tom. I think they are great action films, but they don't feel like great Bond films. And it's funny, Phil, you and I, because again, I think John Wayne notwithstanding, the closest character in American pop culture is Batman.
Yeah.
And it's funny how you and I, Phil, have independently, but at the same time, concurrently, gravitated back towards Batman Returns.
Yes.
Even after these Nolan movies and these Ben Affleck movies, we keep feeling like, wouldn't it be great to have another movie like Batman Returns that still is action-packed, full of stakes, emotionally driven, but fun, you know? And I know we're not getting that with Robert Pattinson, no offense. It's just, I really think it's time for whatever that version of Batman is that plays with it the way maybe Spider-Verse played with Spider-Man.
Obviously, I really enjoyed Nolan's Batman films.
I think they're incredible. Yeah.
Nolan is, obviously, we all know he's one of the most visionary directors.
Yeah, he's a brilliant
one of the
man.
last of the, close to auteur. He's got his thing, and it's amazing, and he does it brilliantly. But I kept thinking he'd never cast Danny DeVito as the Penguin. And that was my problem with them, is exactly what you're saying. I want Danny DeVito as the Penguin. I want Christopher Walken being a huge over-the-top baddie. I want Michelle Pfeiffer going uber cat and not trying to hide behind any truth.
Sure. I mean, there's a part of me that feels like, Nolan's talked a lot about how much he loves Bond, right? I mean, you don't have to look any farther than Tenet and really most of his films to just be like, he just wants to make Bond movies. So his version of Batman is kind of Bondy, or at least it's Michael Mann infused. And because of that, it's like he can't really have fun, like be playful necessarily. He's just not that type of filmmaker.
I would love to see his Bond.
Yeah, sure.
They had a really, really funny actor playing Bond to balance it up. Because the perfect Bond would be able to do the Roger Moore puns and gags and corniness. But then when it comes to the actual nitty-gritty of his work and killing people, it's brutal. And it balances it out. It forgives all the cheesy shit. You see he's a ruthless machine.
I'd say this about...
Nolan definitely nailed that.
Yeah, I'd say this about the Nolan Batmans, a potential Nolan Bond, and Nolan in general. At the time, they were exactly what we needed, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was very into them, remained very into them, wanted a more, adult Batman, wanted a less saccharine Batman, loved the Frank Miller stuff. Like that, the whole thing was very exciting to me at the time. And Nolan has a really, really good sense of what culture wants at any given moment. And you've seen it with a lot of his films. And like, I don't even think you can count Tenet because this year was so weird. But so many of his other films were just like perfectly tuned to the moment they were made. So I do think if he did make a Bond, to your point, Tom, he would, I think, nail it in a way that felt perfect. The way Batman Begins and then Dark Knight felt kind of perfect to us.
What do you think is the Bond that we need at the moment? Where would you go? Daniel Craig's retiring from Bond. What direction would you go?
I think
a 21st century Bond.
I don't know the answer to that.
That's
When you
tough.
were saying when you were saying that we had a conversation, I can't remember anything. We had a conversation, a little snippet about what Bond could be in the 21st century, less misogynistic, more equal, kind of more equal-handed between the genders, more fun. It's going to sound crazy. There is a Lord and Miller version of Bond that I think they were trying to go. I think they were trying to get at with Solo, and it seems like the Star Wars people weren't ready to go there, and casting no aspersions on anybody. But I think that there's a version of that where you cast a comedian. You cast someone who's funny and handsome and charming, like a Tom Mison, for instance. And someone who has been funny in a dramatic setting before, and I think you can go. I think there's a version like that might feel really like the thing we need. Now, Lord and Miller aren't your guys, right? Like there are plenty of British filmmakers who.
But I think you're right, and it's also talking about Batman. The Lego Batman films couldn't have happened without the Nolan Batman films.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they are. Lego Batman is such a great film.
It is. It's brilliant.
The Lego movies are such great films. But that Batman wouldn't have worked if you didn't have the Dark Knight trilogy.
No,
I mean, I think that it does feel like
with the current Daniel Craig Bonds, I think we're ready to go to live action equivalent of.
Yeah. And bringing up Lego Batman, I do think that's something I have forgotten, but it's definitely true. Lego Batman is 100% a Batman movie, right? Yeah. It is not it is a satire, and they are parodying certain elements of Batman, but it hits all of the Batman beats so brilliantly. I do think that you're right, Tom. I think there is a live version that kind of that examines this character in a more winky way. Like I love Skyfall. Skyfall is the one that finally felt like, okay, they're coming to grips with who this guy is. But now I think that we've done that, and we can have a little more fun with the other elements of it. Maybe like feels like your Lazenby scene writ large, right? That little Lazenby scene, but a movie form.
I mean, Fukunaga doing the most recent one means that they don't need to be Brits anymore, or at least it seems as though this is the first American filmmaker that's been allowed to direct a Bond film, which is a pretty big deal. I mean, I think that I'm not quite sure they necessarily needed to do it. I think there's a whole bunch of young, awesome British filmmakers that could have done it. But all that being said, they went with Fukunaga, who I think is very talented. It does open the door. And to your point, Kenny, I would love to see them be a little more meta about it, deconstruct it a little bit more in a little bit more playfully way. I just don't know that the Broccoli's are interested in doing anything like that. Like it seems as though
I'd be really surprised if that happened.
But we'll see. I mean, I think that what the Craig movies have done is allowed it to your point, Kenny, like Skyfall really does kind of get into the meat. If there is any meat in a Bond, they really do try to go there. So there's a little more heft to this character than there was before.
And I've got a feeling they needed to prove that. They needed to prove that Bond was, because probably, I keep coming back to Austin Powers, it pretty much killed Bond.
It did.
And so you had to step back and show that Bond was a three-dimensional character with, I'm going to choke saying the word, backstory.
You love backstory, Tom. That's your favorite thing. Backstory.
What's the backstory discussion?
I hate backstory.
But
I hate
elaborate.
backstory. It's completely pointless. It gets in the way. It's historical exposition. It's pointless. Show it. Just show everyone's history through what they're doing. You don't.
Can I ask a question though?
You can have one line or two, like I mentioned with Lupe. She says, "There's one line. I took 50." He says, Bond says, "Why don't you go home?" And she said, "I spent 15 years trying to escape there." That's it. And then there you go. You get an idea of who she is. You don't then need an entire fucking speech about what it was like with her family, her terrible family in this terrible country, and the uprising and the things that I saw. And I had to chew my thumbs off in order to escape. And these are the fake thumbs that I had to sleep with in order to get these new thumbs.
Can I ask you a question though, Tom? Because we yesterday talked about Mike Leigh's Topsy Turvy, and Mike Leigh doesn't agree with you, right? Like his whole process is to double, triple, quadruple down on that idea of I want my actors to know every inch of this character so that we can find the story together. No, it's a complete. I am not in any way suggesting Mike Leigh should make a Bond film, but yeah.
I don't disagree with them. I think an actor should know a character's entire history.
It's when the writer comes to you and says,
"We don't need to chat about it."
Yes, I agree with that.
That should be brought.
Yeah.
You know who agrees with you, aside from me? Aaron Sorkin feels very strongly.
Is that right?
Yeah, he feels very strongly that the backstory doesn't exist.
Fan of my work.
Yeah.
Is that a true fact? I wouldn't. You're a favorite actor? I don't know. Backstory doesn't exist until you need it for the character in the moment they're in. So he doesn't do the thing that I wish we didn't have to do, but we're not Aaron Sorkin, so we have to do this ridiculous exercise every time we pitch a show. We say, well, she was born to a single mother in a back alley in Birmingham. That comes out when it's needed in the context of whatever is happening in a scene. So I think it is more than even unnecessary. It's limiting. Don't box your characters into a corner. It doesn't make any sense to me. So now I can fill in all the shit about Lupe, about her thumbs like you just did. But if Lupe comes out and says, these are the fake thumbs that I had to sleep with so-and-so to get, the next scene, when she uses the thumbs, they better be used the same way that they were. Yeah, you get.
Right. Yeah, quite.
I think to both of your points, and I agree with both of you, this idea that like once it's told to me, you can't unring that bell, right?
It sucks.
So it's the trouble with, you mentioned earlier when we were talking Lord and Miller about Solo. It's a story we didn't need because also, as well as actors bringing their own backstory, part of the fun of falling in love with characters, especially in a franchise, is we get to decide as an audience their backstory. And so then to see that Han Solo invented his surname because he was traveling alone. I mean, that doesn't...
You didn't want that, Tom? You didn't want to know that that's how his name came to be?
That doesn't really help me watch him on the Forest Moon of Endor.
No.
But you're also speaking to something that I think is really important and is everywhere right now, which is prequels, right? This idea of, well, people love a thing, so why don't we go tell them how we got to the thing that they love? Which feels like weird Easter eggy shit that I don't completely understand. And I don't know that it necessarily works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It just feels cash grabby more than anything, where it's like, well, we can get more juice out of this franchise, so let's do this thing. But to your point, it doesn't actually bolster or make you like. I mean, I don't think that the Star Wars prequels, and some people might disagree with me, make me like the episodes 6, 7, and 8 more, or whatever, number 4, 5, and 6. But you know what I'm saying?
Weirdly, I think Rogue One works so brilliantly because it's not giving any of the characters we already know their backstory.
That's world building backstory. Yeah.
Exactly. And that works really well. And I think Rogue One makes A New Hope a better film.
I agree with that 100%.
I didn't like Rogue One, but I appreciate what you're saying in terms of I appreciate that part of the reason why prequels are so hard, and I think prequels are almost always terrible, is because the question they seek to answer is usually better left unanswered. We've been talking about that. The answer to this question that they answered in Rogue One actually really was interesting. It actually was quite fulfilling, and I do think it makes A New Hope better knowing that backstory. I just thought the movie was overlong and kind of boring, but that's just me.
Right. It also does what the Daniel Craig Bond films did for Bond. It does the same thing for Star Wars in that it shows people who you believe to be real dying in a pretty brutal way, and they're then forgotten about for the story. Yeah, and it shows that there is this galactic war, and it's terrible. Yeah. And so, in a way, it brings the old Star Wars, the original trilogy, makes them more modern. Because you understand the world building, the world that they're in, we can understand it modern where we appreciate the grit. Equally, Bond, Daniel Craig needed to bring Bond, the franchise, to the 21st century. So you start Casino Royale with the brilliant black and white cold opening of him getting his 00 status. That's a really great way of showing, Bond as being Roger Moore, keeping the British end up. I think he's attempting re-entry, sir. That sort of thing. But now, also, there's another side to Bond, which is...
No, I can't remember. Was that Bond or Austin Powers?
That's Bond. That's Moonraker and Q at the very end. What's Bond
Can I just say, though,
I
I agree with everything you're saying, and I want to just piggyback on it for a second and say that, talking about
and also trying to make it relevant to what we're supposed to be talking about. Timothy Dalton does the same thing.
Yeah, it's talking about all these franchises and talking about Bond. I'm really hit with the balancing act of what each of these Bond films have to do, which is to be an easy entry point to a person who's never seen a Bond film, right? Like, it still needs to be its own story. And admittedly, the Daniel Craig movies try to serialize it the most that it's ever been done, and it's still pretty minimal. But they do try to connect the films together to some degree or another. But that balancing act of feeling like you are stepping into a deep franchise that has all of this sort of history to it, and yet this story is fresh and fun and you can step into this one. That's a hard thing to balance. And I think they do it quite well. I mean, I think the Casino Royale, one of the things, and I love Casino Royale, but Ava Green in Casino Royale, who, I mean, is just the best. Having him fall in love with her, like having Bond actually fall in love with someone and having her death resonate in the next film, which the next film not being as strong, but still, like, that idea is, I don't think they've done that before. I mean, forgive me, I haven't seen all of them, but...
You've already forgotten Tracy.
How can I forget Tracy?
Which is also mentioned in...
Oh, she is?
Yes.
Okay.
What's this film called?
This one's called License to Kill. To Grill.
And when the bride has the garter and she wants to and says the next one to catch this, which is a tradition I've never heard of. I thought it was catching the bouquet and they're the next married, but maybe it's the next one who gets to shag me again. And she cuts it to Bond, and Bond doesn't like it. No. And you see a little glimpse of Timothy Dalton actually being able to act. And the groom says he was married once a long time ago. And it's a little reminder to people, to contemporary audiences, that a long time ago, we introduced something that was quite serious with Bond. And Diana
but don't worry about
married
that.
him and died. Just to remind you, there are serious bits. Now let's go fishing. Bring on the marlin.
Yeah, listen, I want to just, I have one question for you guys, which is Sanchez, Bond villain of License to Kill. Not one of the best Bond villains, I would say. I think the actor does a good job. I'm not denigrating the performance necessarily, but as far as Bond villains go, they just always feel like they need to be, a little bit more ridiculous, like a little bit more theatrical and a little bit more comic booky, I guess. Like Lashif in Mads Mikkelsen in Casino Royale is kind of the perfect balance to me of like he cries blood.
Oh,
Love it.
It's the best, right? Like it's just kind of just one molecule away from being ridiculous, and I appreciate that.
Yes. Nolan and the Mendes, who did the first? Did Mendes do Casino Royale?
No, it was. Oh my God, why am I drawing a blank on his name?
I can't
God
remember.
damn it! I'll look it up, but keep talking, Kenny.
Those films do a really good job of modernizing the ridiculousness. Like
Yep.
because the Batman world and the Bond world are necessarily ridiculous, and the ones I've watched from the Connery ones are really ridiculous. Dr. No is absurd. Goldfinger is absurd.
Yeah.
So
I'm just going to interject just very quickly. I read Dr. No originally. Dr. No was going to be a monkey.
Stop.
I desperately hope that's true. Sorry, carry on.
No, but to have such a grounded, realistic Bond villain, that is really more than anything, aside from the copious use of cigarette boats, what felt Miami Vice about it. The villain was someone who could have been taken down by almost any other movie hero. And there is something about a Goldfinger or a Dr. No or Mads Mikkelsen from Casino Royale, where you really, or even Jonathan Pryce's character, where you really need a guy like Bond to get him.
Well, I guess it's not helped by the very first thing you see is your main baddie being foiled. He's captured.
Yeah.
And he only escapes because he's got enough money to escape. And he finds someone who's found about $2 million. And in
your
fact,
$1 million bribes aren't going to work here, Sanchez. $2 million. All right, I'm in.
And
he does have an iguana, though, so there's that.
Yeah, that's true.
Iguanas are a girl's best friend.
By the way, the director of Casino Royale was Martin Campbell, who also did GoldenEye. So he kind of rebooted the franchise twice. And I think it says something about Martin Campbell that those are two very different reboots of the series. And I think he handles it, unbelievably well.
It does it twice.
He's pretty fantastic. So the only other kind of stuff that I wanted to talk about really is kind of the cult stuff for a second, and just get to kind of that part of the plot where we were sort of he takes him to the factory.
Stuff,
yeah, the cult. Yes, cult.
Now that's a Bond villain.
Wayne Newton
of the traditional.
Yes.
Sanchez is fallible and defeatable, and he even says when he's Bond is his guest.
Yes.
And when a henchman comes up and says, "You'll never guess who he is," and Sanchez says, "He's a British agent." "How did you know that?" And Sanchez says something like, "I just know things." "Well, you don't. He just told you." "Oh, literally 2 minutes ago told you."
Pretty much what he says.
That's so great.
So Sanchez is playing. He's pretending to be this, omniscient being. But we as an audience know he isn't. And I don't know whether that's an intentional attempt to modernize the Bond villain, but I like old Bond villains, like the cult leader. That's what you could imagine in a Roger Moore film.
Is that
being
so? All right,
the
now,
main baddie.
You've done a really good job of selling the Roger Moore movies to me, because I can't really watch.
You are going to be so disappointed.
You're talking to a guy who watched every episode of the Adam West Batman. So like that.
Oh wow!
That's what I was about to bring up. Like that is where that character lives. Like it's like those kind of he's the evil priest cult guy who has his own temple. That was wonderful, and also like I thought the scheme was kind of clever, like the way that they use both the telethons to get the bids for more coke, and the temple to help launder the money from the coke. And it was also very.
Can I just say, I like that you say it's clever. I say it's convoluted, and I'm not sure that I totally understand what they were doing. But I appreciate the fact that,
it is
that
convoluted.
Okay.
Just like
I didn't understand it until the second viewing, and I don't think that bodes well for a Bond film, does it?
Just like some of the best villain plots are very convoluted. The best one of all time, Gene Hackman blowing up, California so he can have all the coastline property, is the most convoluted thing of all time. Also, the best and smartest villain plot there is.
For sure. Yes, that's true. I also think, Tom, you talk about the fallibility of him, of Sanchez, which I think really is kind of crystallized in their final fight together. Like they are sort of, I don't want to say they're mirror images of each other, but like it's clear that Sanchez is built in sort of a what if Bond was a villain type mold, and they're kind of playing off.
Tino, I think, is what you're getting at.
Sure. And this final sort of like machete fight they have by the tanker, there's also something, I mean, I gotta say it, him just setting the guy on fire was kind of crazy.
That was amazing.
Because when he plays with the lighter at the wedding, that something's, I mean, Chekhov's gun, that's the very definition. But by then, so much weird shit has happened, and it's such a long film. I'd completely forgotten about it.
I know.
And then there it is. There's the lighter at the end. It's like the T-Rex coming back in Jurassic Park. Yes. There it is.
And it's like, he goes up in like fucking flames. Like he's a fireball.
Then he blows up a tanker.
And then he blows up a tanker.
Yeah, everything blows up. I liked it. I'm sure when Spielberg was pitching out Jurassic Park to his he was like, so have you seen License to Ill? I mean, kill.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it really ends very strong. I'll say that. Like, it gets a little, I would say that it hammocks a little bit in the center, but its last fucking half hour is really going for it.
What do you think of the last part where they then decide to throw a party in Sanchez's house? Bond shows up with Lupe. Carrie Lowell shows up with Q. And then
in Sanchez's house. He hasn't been dead 24 hours.
And they're like, let's throw a party. That's like when they throw like parties in Saddam Hussein's palaces after they killed him. They're like, it's ours now.
Yeah. And then so much for making the women more progressive. Bond gets off with Lupe and then says, actually, no, I'm having the other one. Why don't you go off with the president?
You marry the president.
She's like, and she's like, fine. I love James.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
Oh, that's another line reading from this film that just fucking killed me. Was there's a scene with Q and Carrie Lowell and Lupe, and she says how much she loves James. Like, I can't bring myself for anything bad to happen. I love him so much. And the line reading is just dead. Like, could not be more dead. So it's done over her shoulder, and then it comes back over to her just dead-eyed face after she said that she just loved this man. It's
I just assumed she had seen a lot of James Bond movies. That's the only
this character I love.
Bond. Right after that moment, because Carrie Lowell is she's so sad. She's so sad because of Bond and Lupe. So sad. Yeah. And Q comes up and puts his arms around her. Now, earlier on in the film, Bond says to Q, and this film, for me, I'm surprised we haven't touched on it yet, is Q's film. He's
in it a lot.
He has more screen time in this film than any of the other films. And earlier, Bond says, you make a hell of a field operative. And Q, you can see, I'm like the spies. In this moment, after I Love James, Carrie Lowell, very sad, Q puts his arms around her and says, field operatives must use every means at their disposal. Is that Bond trying to shag her? Because is that Q trying to shag her?
I think so.
Because he's beginning to think of himself as a field operative. Snuggle up, field operatives, we have to do everything. So do me.
It certainly feels that way.
You guys are probably right. I was trying to explain that one to Rollins. And I was my son. It's like, so there's a show called The Americans, and in The Americans, they do a lot of.
That's amazing.
No, I couldn't really explain why he kissed one woman and then jumped into the pool.
Jumped into the pool.
Honest to God, dude, fucking romantic. That was romantic. This is the romantic bond.
I do love that.
And then it gets to a statue of a fish that winks at the camera.
Yeah. There's also, I'm sorry, but I have to mention, there's a frightening fish sculpture in the bedroom that Bond sleeps in Sanchez's house, where he wakes up with a start and you just see this fucking terrifying fish with like a human face on it or something. I'm like, what is this?
Now, if you were making the opening titles, the opening credits to this film, would you make it a Chinese woman jumping around with a camera? Because I think that's probably the smallest part of this film. And it's really weird to me that that's what they decided to get. There's not a single fish in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it'd be all sharks.
An iguana.
It'd be sharks.
Yeah, exactly.
Fish in various states of undress, I think. Are you... this is just this is just a factual question. Every James Bond film ends with James and the Bond girl together. Everyone
feels that way.
Is that that's
the ones I've seen? Yeah,
I don't know because cool. Always,
well, actually, no. Casino Royale doesn't. Casino Royale ends with him and the theme song coming in for the first time at the very end of Casino Royale. Yeah, this does come back to two lines. The two lines that end the two last Pierce Brosnan films. The first is, I thought Christmas only came once a year because her name is Christmas. And it is, I mean, it's worth naming her Christmas for that joke. I don't care what anybody says. I think that is just ridiculous. And
that's
then
your little laptop. Oh, good day's work for Phil.
Listen, man, whatever. And then the Die Another Day ends with a black screen, and you just hear Halle Berry saying, "It's too big, it's not going to fit." And he's putting diamonds in her belly button.
Yeah, that's a typical sex move. Everyone knows that. So that's not that.
There you go.
You know, that was the original for the final episode of Sopranos when it goes.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I heard over black screen.
Yeah.
We should rate this movie. Kenny, do you want to start with your rating of this film?
Yeah. I love the movie.
Oh, Kenny, I think. Hold on. Your audio went away. Can anybody hear
I can
me?
Hear. I can hear. I can hear both.
Can you hear me?
This might be me. Hold on one second. Can you hear me now?
I've always been able to hear you. Can you hear me?
For some reason, my earbuds died. So give me 1 second to just put on my other headphones. Apologies.
This is what a hit podcast is all about.
Do you guys see how many fucking movies and documentaries they're making about the GameStop thing?
It's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
People are already over it. This lasted like 3 days, and people are done with it now. They're good. You're telling me you're gonna in 9 months or a year, people are gonna be lining up to see these things that like honestly didn't even matter. All right.
And the trouble is now people forget so quickly. Anything that takes a big hit on the internet that we love, it's done, and we're on to the next one. Anyway.
I mean, I admit, Phil knows this. For 3 days, I was obsessed with the story, but like I've been obsessed with a lot of stories for 3 days. I don't need to see a movie about it in 12 months. Okay, you want me to do my my thing?
Do your ratings.
All right. So I loved this movie a lot. I honestly gave it a 79. I kind of want to go a little higher after this conversation. I think Tom pointed out a bunch of things that I didn't notice that made me love it even more. I'm not going to go much higher. It's not a masterpiece or anything like that. But it's kind of fun. I'm going to give it an 82. Thrilled that I watched this movie. Do feel that I forgot if it was you, Tom, or Phil. Hammocks in the middle. Yeah, it's a little over long. Again, we had just watched Topsy Turvy. I just watched Topsy Turvy the day before, which is 40 minutes longer. I liked a lot less, and also felt like it went quicker. So there is some stuff here that certainly could be cut out. But yeah, I loved it. I really, really just love a good 80s action movie.
Yeah, I mean, I had not seen this film before this, and I do like Bond films, and I do like 80s action films. So like it was, as I was watching it, I was enjoying it, but then it kind of slowed a little bit. I got a little confused, but again, like it's a fucking Bond movie. It's like you know what I mean. It's kind of like you can't really rate a Bond film for all intents and purposes. They're kind of impervious to any sort of criticism, but. Before this podcast, I probably would have given it about a 65, but this conversation being as it is, you guys have, I'm at a 75 now. I think it's a super fun movie. I think it's a good Bond film.
I'm the same. I would have gone 60s, early mid 60s. If they cut Florida, it would be in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I enjoyed it. I needed to watch it a second time to understand it.
Like all good Bond films.
I wrote down several puns and also moments where you thought that needs a joke.
Yeah,
that needs a joke.
Yeah. Tom, is there a Bond movie or several Bond movies that you think are bad Bond films?
The later Pierce Brosnan ones, and okay. I hate saying that because I think he could, given the right Bond films, could have been up there with Connery and Moore. He should have been amazing. He's great at the jokes. He's great at the action. He's beautiful. But dodgy films.
But do you think that, this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation, which is that Bond is sort of a reflection, I think, Kenny, you said this, is a reflection of the time he's in, right? So you have Bond, Brosnan's Bond is from 95 to 2002, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's around there. Mm. And at that time, how does Bond fit into the sort of movie landscape? And they just didn't really know. It seems like they didn't really know what to do with him, unfortunately.
And also, a shitload changed in the late 90s.
Yes. Yeah.
And so how does Bond fit into the age of the internet? And yes. I don't think they really
poorly
found his place.
Poorly. Yeah, poorly.
But yeah, no, it's an interesting point because I also think that action movies in general around this period of time, 95 to 2002, particularly the end of that, 90, like the action movies we cover sort of suck in 99.
Yep.
And they just got worse and worse.
Action movies in the late 80s were excellent.
Excellent. Yeah, they're
what's
great.
What's interesting about this one, and you saying it fits in with the time, well, it kind of does in that you're steering away from the Cold War and more into Miami Vice territory. But when you look at the other action films that were released in 89, they're fun, like Ghostbusters 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Mm-hmm. They're big, fun, over-the-top ones, which Bond should have slipped into there beautifully, and it should have been the highest grossing film of the year.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting, Tom. I think that as you know, my basic theory about Bond is it's 2 to 3 years behind the zeitgeist. If that movie got made in 91, 92, that might have been more in line with this Spielbergian Ghostbusters 2 idea that I think you're talking about, whereas this reflected more of that mid 80s Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, Jean-Claude Van Damme type thing that I love. And I don't care that this came on the tail end of that because, again, I wasn't there at the time. They mean nothing to me. But yeah, I think that we missed out, and they missed out on that Bond adventure for everybody that he easily could slot right into.
Yeah, it's it feels like a movie that unfortunately was sort of there were outside things affecting it in terms of where they had to shoot it, how they had to shoot it, which affected the story that they were telling. A writer's strike. Like there's just a lot of factors that kind of made this movie just not necessarily rise to the place that it could have been, unfortunately. I'm still like...
But the legacy of it is very important. No, seriously. The legacy of Dalton as Bond, 100%. We wouldn't have Jason Bourne without Dalton's Bond.
That's true. That's true. We wouldn't have Daniel Craig's Bond, quite frankly. I don't think. Like, I think that without this film, kind of,
and I think he's a great Bond, Dalton.
I do too. Yeah. I think he lays the groundwork for a more grounded, visceral Daniel Craig Bond. I absolutely agree with that for sure.
The answer to your original question, the what is the Bond version today?
Yeah.
And I said the Lord and Miller, but I might be a little behind the zeitgeist a little bit on that one. Young Bond. A young Bond. It doesn't have to be an origin story. That's not what I'm pitching.
Backstory.
No backstory. Just a young Bond, played with kind of a wonder, but a competence, not unlike Tom Holland's Spider-Man, might feel refreshing and fun at this point.
How young?
That's interesting.
School Bond.
No. 23, 24, 25.
You know, there are a series of books, young adult books, Young Bond.
Interesting.
And they're written by a guy called Charlie Higson, who throughout the 90s and noughties was I think, one of the best comedy producers.
Really?
In British TV. And he turned his hand to this Young Bond series. They're really good. And maybe
I want to ask you one more question, Tom. It has nothing to do with Bond.
No.
In England, you guys use the term naughties like it's not a weird thing.
Question mark.
This is the kind of thing I would have anxiety about, which I did for the first 18 years of my life. You have the beauty of decades, the beauty of the simplicity of beauty and simplicity of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. What are we going to call the naughties? And we never settled on a term here, so we just don't call it anything.
Yeah, we don't call it anything.
It's a dead decade.
What's the aughts? Decade. Wasn't it the aughts for a second?
If you have to call it something, you call it the aughts. But we also don't have a term. We also don't have a term for last decade. We don't call it the teens.
We don't call it the teens.
So
we don't have a term for either.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. I respect it because I love the Best Pick podcast, as Phil knows, and they just call it the naughties like you just did. Like it's not this bizarre thing that you had. But
okay, here's a question for you.
Tell me.
What is the name of the guy who lives in Sherwood Forest and he battles against the Sheriff of Nottingham and he's got Maid Marian and Kevin Costner?
Robin Hood?
Now, what's your name? Full name?
What's going on right now? I don't
say your name.
Philip Iskov?
Why Robin Hood? Do you emphasize the Robin?
Oh.
Robin Hood. But you don't do it with any other name.
That's true.
Robin.
Why emphasize the Robin and not the Hood when generally we emphasize people's last names?
Huh? Phil Iskov.
Yeah, but you emphasized my last name.
You're Phil Iskov.
Anyway, that's interesting.
Hi, Bart. You're right.
It's not that interesting. Can you cut that bit?
It's not that interesting. Well, more than anything, Tom, thank you for coming on to talk about
Robin.
License to Kill.
Yeah, you're right.
License to Thrill.
It's
Robin.
I love it. Thanks. It's a pleasure.
And we hope to have you back to talk about shirtless Frenchmen at some point.
Oh, come on. We can do something more fun than that.
Well, we could just...
This has made me change my mind.
Yeah, we should do something more fun.
How do you pronounce the title? Because it's embarrassing for me. Beau Travaux? Travail? Are we going to do that?
It's a great film.
I mean, I hear it's a great film. I'm not... We have to cover it at some point, Kenny. I don't know how much fun it's going to be for us to cover, but I think we should cover it.
You know, people say it's one of the finest films of the year. I look forward to doing it. But
we're going to... Tom, more than anything... You're in this hemisphere, and we need to capitalize on it while it's happening. So we're gonna have you back. We're gonna find you.
Are you in New York?
He's in Toronto.
You're shooting something there.
He's shooting Apple's C.
I look forward to seeing. Oh, all right. Just go ahead and say
it. He's hanging out with Jason Momoa all day long.
Momoa.
How
Momoa and Mison together at last. It's the pairing everyone's been
finally.
waiting for.
yeah.
The internet's abuzz.
Aquaman and Ichabod. I like it.
Aquaman. Woo! Well, we're gonna have you back, but thank you for coming on, Tom. And we're gonna make this happen far more regularly than the however 2 years or 2.5 years it's been since you were on for Cruel Intentions. So, thank you.
Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? 1999.